The rain pounded against the windows of the Magnolia Diner as Amelia Bennett watched the 8-year-old boy devour his third plate of fried chicken and mashed potatoes. His clothes were expensive but soaking wet, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. But his eyes, those stormy gray eyes, held a loneliness that made her heart ache. She had no idea that feeding this hungry child would change everything. She had no idea that his father was Alexander Volkov, the Siberian ghost, the most feared man in Chicago. And she certainly had no idea that in just 3 weeks, this same man would be standing in her diner, his black dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar to reveal the intricate dragon tattoo coiling up his neck, his platinum Patek Philippe catching the light as he cupped her face in his hands and spoke words that would echo through her soul forever. But right now, all she knew was that a child needed help, and Amelia Bennett had never been able to turn away from someone in need, even when she herself was drowning. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe in love. Subscribe now so you will not miss what happens next, because sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the smallest act of kindness. Amelia wiped her hands on her worn, fraying apron and slowly walked toward the corner table where the boy was sitting, pulling out a chair and lowering herself into it across from him, forcing the gentlest smile she could manage, even as her heart was heavy with worry. And the boy lifted his head to look at her, his clear gray eyes holding a flicker of wariness, like a small animal cautiously watching a world it did not trust. And when she asked his name, he hesitated for a moment before whispering that his name was Misha, Mikhail Volkov, though everyone called him Misha, his voice carrying a faint, unfamiliar cadence, proper English touched by the distant breath of a place Amelia could not immediately identify. And when she asked why he was here alone in the rain, his answer tightened her chest with pain, as Misha explained that he had gone to the mall with his nanny Tanya, but Tanya was busy talking on the phone with her boyfriend as always, and he grew bored and followed a stray cat outside. And when he came back, Tanya was gone. The mall was gone too, and he just kept walking through the rain until he saw the lights of this diner. And anger flared inside Amelia at the thought of a careless nanny who could allow an 8-year-old child to wander alone through the streets of Chicago. But then she looked into Misha's eyes and saw something deeper than the fear of a lost child. She saw a loneliness that had lasted far too long, the loneliness of a child accustomed to being left behind, a feeling she knew intimately, better than anyone, because 12 years earlier she herself had been a 15-year-old girl, standing in a cemetery under pouring rain, watching 2 coffins carrying her parents slowly lowered into the cold ground. A car accident, they said, as if those 2 words could explain how she lost her entire world in a single night, and her grandmother Maggie had taken her in, raised her in this very diner with the scent of butter and midnight cooking lessons. But then Maggie too had passed away 6 years ago from terminal lung cancer, leaving Amelia with more than $80,000 in hospital debt and a diner that was slowly dying. And then Derek had appeared, the man she believed was the love of her life, only to become her worst nightmare. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of beatings, humiliation, and control, down to every breath she took. And when he finally left, he took with him every last dollar of her meager savings. And now Amelia lived in a run-down studio apartment behind the diner with no hot water, no heat in winter, surviving on leftover food from the kitchen and working 18 hours a day just to keep the diner from closing. And the doctors said she was severely anemic and needed rest and proper meals. But how could she rest when the landlord Harold came every few days to threaten eviction, when the hospital's collection calls never stopped ringing, when she had only $23 left in her wallet to survive the week? Yet as she looked at Misha, at the storm, gray eyes slowly warming as he talked about the stray cat he had followed, Amelia forgot her own pain for a moment, reaching across the table to gently wipe the rain, still clinging to his cheek with a paper napkin. And Misha looked at her in surprise, as if he were unaccustomed to being touched with such tenderness. And in that moment, amid the storm, 2 lonely souls found each other. Misha had finished his 3rd plate and was staring at the empty dish with quiet regret when Amelia asked if he wanted anything more to eat, and he shook his head, then suddenly asked a question that made her freeze, asking if she was sad, saying her eyes looked sad like Papa's, and Amelia did not know how to answer, so she only smiled and asked him in return whether Misha himself was sad, and the boy fell silent for a long while, his gray eyes gazing through the window where the rain kept pouring down as if the sky itself were crying. And then he began to speak, his voice so soft that Amelia had to lean closer to hear him, telling her that his mother's name was Irina, that she had blonde hair and used to sing him lullabies in Russian every night before he slept, but that his mother was gone now, gone when he was only 4 years old, and he remembered little about her except the scent of jasmine that he still searched for sometimes in his dreams. and Papa said Mama had gone up to the sky, but Misha did not understand why she would want to go to the sky when he was still here, wondering if he had done something wrong, if he had been a bad boy and that was why she left. And Amelia felt her heart shatter as she listened, pulling him into her arms and holding him tight as if she could shield him from all the pain in the world, whispering that his mother had not left him, that she loved him very much, and that sometimes grown-ups had to go away, not because they wanted to but because they had no other choice. And Misha looked up at her, his eyes shining, but without a single tear falling, as if he had learned to hold his feelings inside from a very young age. And he went on to say that Papa was very busy, that Papa worked day and night, that Papa always had men in black clothes following him, and Papa said he had to fight monsters to keep everyone safe, just like in the comic books. But Misha did not understand why the monsters never went away, and most of the time he stayed at home with nannies, but all the nannies were the same, caring only about their phones, none of them wanting to play chess with him, none of them wanting to listen to him talk about the books he read. And Amelia looked around the diner and saw that Ruth had left long ago, and there was no one else but the two of them. And suddenly an idea came to her, and she asked Misha if he wanted to play chess, and his eyes lit up for the first time since he had stepped into the diner, but then he lowered his head in disappointment, saying she did not have a chessboard here. And Amelia smiled mysteriously and went behind the counter, returning with a handful of beer bottle caps and soda bottle caps which she arranged on a square plastic tray, declaring proudly that Corona caps would be the white pieces and Coca caps would be the black ones. And Misha stared at the improvised board with wide-eyed amazement before bursting into laughter, a clear, bright sound that echoed through the empty diner. And they played 3 games, Misha winning all 3, and Amelia had to admit that this 8-year-old boy played chess better than any adult she had ever met. And after the final game, Amelia asked if he wanted to learn how to make cookies, her grandmother's secret recipe that no one else besides her had ever known, and Misha nodded eagerly, and the two of them went into the kitchen together. Amelia, showing him how to measure the flour, how to crack the eggs, how to mix the butter just right, and flour flew everywhere, sticking to Misha's nose and to Amelia's hair, but neither of them cared. And for the first time in a very long while, the Magnolia diner was filled with laughter, and when the first batch of cookies came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, Misha took a bite and said it was the best thing he had ever eaten in his life. And Amelia looked at him, at the white dusting of flour on his cheek, at the rare smile blooming on his lips, and she knew that no matter how hard her life was, this moment was priceless, and she did not know that this very moment would change her destiny forever. The clock on the wall was nearing 8 o'clock in the evening, when Amelia realized she could not keep Misha here forever, and though her heart wanted to stretch this fragile moment of peace a little longer, reason told her that somewhere out there a father must be going mad with worry. So she gently asked Misha if he remembered Papa's phone number, and the boy nodded and recited a string of digits flawlessly, as if he had memorized it long ago. And Amelia took out her old phone, its screen split by a long crack from the time she dropped it the previous month, and began to dial, her heart beating a little faster for reasons she could not quite name, perhaps from the unease of speaking to a stranger, perhaps from a vague instinct that something was about to change. And the phone rang for a moment before someone answered, a voice emerging, low and cold as ice, speaking a rapid stream of Russian Amelia could not understand before switching to English with a single word, Volkov. Just one word, yet spoken with such absolute authority that Amelia felt as though a bucket of icy water had been poured down her spine, and she swallowed, forcing her voice to stay calm as she explained that she had found a boy named Misha at her diner, that he was lost and safe there now. And silence followed for several seconds, a silence so heavy it was suffocating, before the voice spoke again, this time sharp as a blade, asking whether the boy was hurt, not a question but a command demanding an immediate answer. And Amelia hurried to reassure him that Misha was perfectly fine, that he had eaten and was very happy, and before she could say anything more the voice cut in, asking for the address, and Amelia read out the address of the Magnolia diner, her hand trembling slightly, though she did not know why. "In 5 minutes," the voice said, before the call ended abruptly, and Amelia stared at the darkened screen, her heart pounding in her chest, because there was something about that man, about that voice, that set every one of her senses on alert. And she turned back to Misha, who was sitting on the chair swinging his legs and cheerfully eating his second cookie. "And Papa is coming to pick you up," she said as gently as she could despite the turmoil inside her. And Misha nodded, but the smile on his lips faded just a little, as if he were not quite ready to leave this place. And less than 5 minutes later Amelia heard the roar of engines outside, and she looked through the glass door and froze, because it was not one vehicle but 3 sleek black SUVs pulling to a sharp stop in front of the diner, the kind she had only ever seen in movies about presidents or the Mafia. And the doors opened, and a group of men stepped out, dressed in black suits, wearing dark sunglasses even though night had already fallen, moving with the precision of highly trained soldiers, and they quickly spread out around the diner. 2 standing guard at the front door, 2 at the back, the others forming a steel wall around the building, and Amelia felt her feet root themselves to the floor as she found herself unable to move, unable to breathe, able only to stare at the surreal scene unfolding before her eyes, as her small, shabby diner suddenly became the center of a lockdown she could not begin to explain. And Misha, by contrast, showed no fear at all, merely letting out a sigh far too old for a child his age before hopping down from the chair. "And Papa is here," he said calmly, as if this were a sight he had known all his life. And then the diner door opened, the bell chimed softly, and Amelia saw him, the man who did not merely step into the room but swallowed all the air within it. He was tall, taller than any man Amelia had ever met, at least 6 feet 3 inches, with shoulders broad enough to seem capable of carrying the weight of the world. His black hair slicked back to perfection, only a few strands of early silver at his temples, marking the traces of sleepless nights and life-or-death decisions. His face carved like granite, sharp and cold, with a faint scar cutting across his left eyebrow like a reminder of a storm-ridden past. But it was his eyes that made Amelia forget how to breathe. Gray eyes the same color as Misha's. Yet where the boy's eyes were, the sky before a storm, this man's were the eye of the tempest itself, cold and dangerous enough to freeze the soul of anyone who dared to stare too long. And he wore a perfectly tailored 3-piece black suit that hugged his powerful frame, a black shirt beneath it unbuttoned at the collar, and through that narrow opening, Amelia caught a glimpse of a tattoo, a dragon rendered in intricate lines coiling from his chest up toward his neck like a living creature, and on his wrist rested a platinum Patek Philippe watch, whose value Amelia knew could buy her diner outright 10 times over. Everything about this man radiated power, wealth, and something darker she did not dare to name, until Misha's voice broke the terrifying silence. "Papa." The boy ran toward him, and what happened next left Amelia stunned. The Siberian ghost, a man whose mere presence could make others fall to their knees in fear, dropped to one knee and wrapped his son in his arms, hands large enough to crush a skull, cradling the boy as if he were the most precious treasure on earth. "Misha," he whispered in Russian, his voice low and rough as though containing an entire volcano of emotion, kissing his son's hair, his forehead, checking every inch of the boy's body as if terrified to find even the smallest scratch. And in that moment Amelia saw a completely different man. Not the monster guarded by those men outside, but a desperate father who had just recovered the most valuable thing in his life. Then he stood, one hand still resting on Misha's shoulder, and those icy gray eyes turned to Amelia, and she felt pierced through, as if he could read every thought, every secret, every hidden fear inside her. "You fed my son," he said, not a question but a statement. Amelia swallowed and forced herself to stand straight despite the trembling in her legs. "He was hungry and cold," she said. "I could not leave him that way." His eyes narrowed, studying her as if she were a complex equation to be solved. "What do you want?" The question delivered with the cold pragmatism of a man accustomed to everything in life having a price. Amelia blinked, confused. "Want what?" she echoed. "Money?" he said bluntly. "Or a favor? Or something else?" "Everyone wants something. What do you want in exchange for taking care of my son?" An anger flared in Amelia's chest, drowning out even her fear. She lifted her chin and met those frozen eyes without blinking. "I want him to go home safely," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "That is all. I do not need your money. I do not need your favor. I only did what any decent person would do when they see a child who needs help." Silence followed, stretching long enough for Amelia to hear her own heart pounding wildly. Then something shifted in the man's eyes, fleeting as lightning but unmistakable. Surprise, confusion, as if he had just glimpsed a mythical creature he never believed existed. "You do not know who I am, do you?" he asked slowly. Amelia shrugged. "I know you are the father of a smart, polite, and lonely boy. That is all I need to know." And for the first time that night she saw the corner of the man's mouth curve ever so slightly, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one long dead struggling to come back to life. Misha tugged at his father's sleeve, his clear gray eyes lifting in a pleading look no father could easily refuse, asking Papa if he could come back here, saying that Miss Amelia had promised to teach him her secret cookie recipe, and that she played chess with him and lost all 3 games, yet was still happy, that no one had ever played chess with him like that before. And Alexander looked down at his son before his gaze slowly shifted to Amelia, who stood there in her old, worn apron dusted with flour, her auburn hair loose and tangled, her calloused hands clasped together at her stomach, looking back at him with something he could not define, not fear though she had every reason to be afraid, not greed though he knew she was drowning in debt, not flattery though he was accustomed to people groveling before him, but steadiness and self-respect, something he rarely encountered in his world where everything and everyone could be bought. "And you taught my son how to bake," he said, his voice no longer as cold as before but carrying something else, as if he were trying to solve a riddle, and Amelia nodded and said it was her grandmother's recipe, and that the boy learned quickly, that he was a smart child. "I know," Alexander replied, his eyes never leaving her, and the silence stretched between them, tense but no longer terrifying. Then Alexander looked around the diner, his gaze passing over the peeling painted walls, the battered chairs, the ceiling fan creaking overhead, and Amelia knew he saw everything, the poverty, the struggle she tried to hide, and shame rose in her chest before she lifted her head, because she had nothing to be ashamed of. This was her grandmother's legacy. This was all she had, and she was proud of it. And when Alexander looked back at her, there was something new in his icy gray eyes, something Amelia could not read, and he reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a thick wad of cash, all crisp $100 bills, and placed it on the counter. And Amelia looked at the money and did not need to count to know it was at least $5,000, a sum that could save her from every debt crushing her shoulders. Her heart raced and her hands clenched, but then she shook her head and said she could not accept it, her voice trembling slightly yet firm, and Alexander's brows lifted, clearly unaccustomed to refusal. "This is not charity," he said. "It is payment for the meal, and for your time." He ate 1 serving of chicken and potatoes. Amelia replied plainly, "It costs $12. I will take $12 and no more." And for the first time, Alexander Volkov did not know how to react, standing there with the money still on the counter, staring at the thin woman who was refusing a sum that could change her life. And Misha tugged at his sleeve again, asking Papa if he could come back. "Please." And Alexander looked at his son, then at Amelia, then back at his son, and said yes in a low, thoughtful voice, taking back the stack of bills and leaving only a single $20 note before leading Misha toward the door. But before stepping out, he stopped and turned back to look at Amelia one last time, saying he would bring Misha on Saturday and that she would teach him to bake as she had promised. Not an offer, but a command. And strangely, Amelia did not feel offended. She nodded, and for the first time that night she truly smiled, telling Misha she would be waiting for him. And the boy waved goodbye before following his father out the door. And the Magnolia diner fell silent once more, yet this silence was different. No longer heavy or lonely, but carrying the promise of something new about to begin. That night, after the line of black vehicles vanished into the curtain of rain, Amelia locked the diner door and dragged herself back to the studio behind it, calling it an apartment, though, in truth, it was little more than a roughly converted storage room, no more than a couple of dozen square meters, with a narrow old single bed, a rusted electric stove, and a bathroom whose tap ran only cold water, whether it was winter or summer. And she flicked on the light switch, the bulb flickering a few times before finally glowing, casting a sickly yellow light over walls blotched with damp and mold, and she sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the stack of unpaid bills piled on the wobbly wooden table, suddenly feeling exhausted down to the bone, because she was only 27 years old. Yet there were nights when she felt as though she had already lived through 100 years of suffering. 12 years earlier, she had been an innocent 15-year-old girl with loving parents, a warm suburban home, and bright dreams of the future, until one December night when the police knocked on her grandmother's door where she was spending the weekend, telling her that her parents had died in a car accident on their way to pick her up, a truck losing control, a sharp curve, and in an instant, Amelia's entire world collapsed, and she remembered standing at the funeral beneath pouring rain, watching 2 coffins slowly lowered into the earth, and wondering why she was still alive when everyone she loved was gone. And her grandmother Maggie saved her, taking her into the Magnolia diner and raising her with fragrant meals and life lessons shared by the warmth of the stove, teaching her to cook and telling her that every dish was a story, and every recipe a legacy to be preserved, saying that the diner was not just a business, but a place where lonely souls could find warmth. And Amelia had believed that with all her heart. But then Maggie left her too. Terminal lung cancer, the doctors said. 3 months left. And in those 3 months, Amelia sold everything she could sell, and borrowed everything she could borrow, just to buy a little more time with her. And when her grandmother closed her eyes for the last time, her hand still clasped around Amelia's, she realized she had lost the last family she had in the world and inherited a crushing hospital debt of more than $80,000. And then Derek appeared like a light at the end of the tunnel, or at least that was what she thought. Handsome and gentle, speaking the sweet words she had longed to hear after years of loneliness, proposing after only 6 months of dating, and Amelia said yes, believing she had finally found a safe harbor. But the nightmare began the night after the wedding. The first slap coming when she cooked something he did not like, the first punch when she dared to answer back, followed by beatings that grew more frequent and insults that cut deeper and deeper, until Amelia slowly forgot who she was, knowing only how to lower her head, endure, and beg forgiveness for faults she could not even understand. 3 years of living hell, 3 years of constant fear, 3 years of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves and forced smiles. And when Derek finally left, he took every last dollar of her meager savings, leaving behind a scrap of paper with scrawled words telling her she was useless and unworthy of love. That was 2 years ago. And since then, Amelia had lived like a shadow, working 18 hours a day from 5 in the morning until 11 at night, cooking, serving, and cleaning, all by herself, eating leftover scraps from the kitchen, sometimes nothing more than a few pieces of dry bread and a cup of water, because every cent had to go toward debt. And last month she collapsed in the kitchen, and the doctor at the free clinic told her she was severely anemic and needed rest and proper nourishment immediately. But how could she rest when the hospital's collection calls never stopped? When the landlord Harold came every few days to threaten eviction? When she had only a few dollars left in her wallet to survive tomorrow? And Amelia looked once more at the stack of bills, and then down at her thin, calloused hands, wondering how much longer she could endure, how much longer she had to fight, until she remembered Misha's clear gray eyes and the sound of his laughter while learning to bake, and a small, fragile spark of hope flickered in the darkness. Maybe tomorrow would be better, she told herself as she did every night, even though she did not truly believe it. 3 days after that fateful stormy night, just as he had promised, Alexander brought Misha back to the Magnolia Diner, and Amelia was wiping down a table when the doorbell chimed, her heart quickening without warning as she saw the 8-year-old boy rush in with a radiant smile lighting up his face, calling out her name and asking excitedly what she would teach him to bake today. And behind him, Alexander entered with the same familiar presence, the perfectly tailored black suit, the cold gray eyes sweeping over the diner, as if assessing every corner, saying nothing as he merely nodded to Amelia before choosing the most secluded corner table, where he could observe the entire room without drawing attention, while Marcus, the tall bodyguard with a face carved from stone, took up his post outside the glass door like a silent statue, and Amelia forced herself not to dwell on the overwhelming presence of the man, focusing instead on Misha, as she told him they would be making apple pie that day. A recipe her grandmother had once said could warm anyone's heart even on the coldest days, and Misha eagerly followed her into the kitchen, and for the next 2 hours the small diner was filled with the sound of children's laughter, a sweetness Amelia had nearly forgotten, as the boy learned quickly, his small hands skillfully kneading dough, slicing apples, sprinkling cinnamon sugar with serious concentration, though from time to time Amelia caught him glancing toward the corner table where his father sat, as if he needed to reassure himself that Papa was still there, had not vanished like so many others in his life, and each time Alexander gave a slight nod, a small gesture that was enough to send Misha back to his task with renewed ease. And when the first apple pie came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, Misha insisted on bringing a slice for his father to taste, and Amelia watched from afar as the boy ran to the corner table, setting the plate down with glowing pride. And Alexander looked at the pie, then at his son, and Amelia saw the faintest curve touch the corner of his mouth before he cut a piece, tasted it, and nodded to Misha, saying simply that it was good, 2 plain words that were enough to make the boy leap with joy. And that was the first day, followed by the second, the third, the fourth, with Alexander bringing Misha almost every afternoon, the pattern repeating itself as the boy cooked with Amelia in the kitchen while his father worked quietly at the corner table on a silver laptop, his eyes occasionally lifting to them. And then Amelia began to notice something strange, because the diner suddenly had customers, not just Ruth or the handful of familiar regulars, but new faces, men in expensive suits, women wearing glittering jewelry, who came in for coffee and meals, left generous tips, and slipped away without a word. And Amelia was not foolish. She knew these people did not simply wander into a shabby diner on a quiet corner by chance. She knew who stood behind it, yet every time she thought of asking, she saw Misha laughing, saw that the day's earnings were enough to cover this month's electricity bill, and she swallowed the question. telling herself that perhaps this was Alexander Volkov's way of showing gratitude, a way that did not wound her pride as taking money directly from him would have. And one afternoon, as Misha animatedly talked about a stray cat he had named Whiskers and secretly kept in the garden of the estate, Amelia caught Alexander looking at her, not with the cold, measuring gaze of their first meeting, but with something else, something deeper. She could not read, and she quickly turned away, pretending to busy herself with the stove, though the warmth lingering on her cheeks refused to fade, and she told herself it was only because the kitchen was too hot, nothing at all to do with the man sitting in the corner of the diner. 1 week had passed since Alexander and Misha began coming to the diner regularly, and Amelia was slowly growing accustomed to this new rhythm of life. Yet old debts did not simply vanish, and that morning, just as she unlocked the door to prepare for a new workday, Harold Pemberton appeared like a familiar nightmare. A man in his 60s with a bloated belly, small greedy eyes, and a false smile that never reached them, the owner of the entire block who never let Amelia forget it, calling her Bennett in a drawn-out, contemptuous tone, and asking when she planned to pay the rent now that 5 months were overdue. And Amelia felt her stomach tighten as she explained, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm, that she knew she owed him money and begged for more time because business was finally improving and she promised to pay in installments, only for Harold to laugh, a thick, malicious sound, mocking her for always asking for time and demanding to know who would pay his taxes and maintenance costs if he indulged her excuses. Stepping closer until the stench of cheap cigars and sweat made Amelia feel sick, telling her coldly that she had until the end of the week, and if there was no money she would be thrown out, because he intended to sell the place to developers eager to build luxury condominiums, and she had no right to cling to such valuable land. And tears welled in Amelia's eyes, but she bit her lip and held them back, telling him in a choked voice that this diner was her grandmother's legacy, and begging him not to take away the only thing she had left, earning only a look of disgust as he sneered about crocodile tears, and warned her again that without money by the weekend she would be on the street. When suddenly the diner bell rang, and Harold turned irritably to snap at the inconsiderate customer who had interrupted him, only for the words to die in his throat as he saw who had entered. Alexander Volkov standing in the doorway in a black suit as dark as night, gray eyes fixed on Harold with something far more terrifying than anger, the absolute indifference of a man who regarded another human being as no more than an insect. With Marcus filling most of the doorway behind him, massive and emotionless, and Alexander asked calmly if there was a problem here, his voice steady as if discussing the weather, though every word carried the weight of a deadly threat, and Harold went pale as sweat slid down his temple, knowing exactly who stood before him, knowing who in Chicago did not know the Siberian ghost, or the stories of those who dared oppose him, and vanished without a trace, stammering Volkov's name and asking what he was doing here, saying he had not known he was acquainted with Bennett. But Alexander did not answer, instead walking slowly toward Harold, each step like a countdown to the end of the world, stopping less than a step away, towering over him and looking down with eyes that could freeze hell itself, saying he had heard Harold was bothering his person and that he did not like it, prompting Harold to swallow hard and mutter that he was only collecting rent, and Alexander tilted his head, as if considering how best to deal with an insect before asking how much, listening to the trembling figure Harold gave, and smiling faintly, a smile that never reached his eyes, calling it a small matter and instructing him to return to his office and never set foot here again, asking if he understood, and Harold nodded frantically and backed toward the door as fast as he could without breaking into a run. And only when he disappeared around the corner did Amelia realize she had been holding her breath the entire time. Amelia let out a long, trembling breath, her legs giving way until she had to grip the counter to keep from collapsing, but as the shock faded, it was replaced by a surge of anger that flared like fire, and she turned to face Alexander, her green eyes burning bright, telling him he had no right to do that, her voice shaking with fury as she said this was her problem, and she did not need him interfering. And Alexander lifted one eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his composed face, as he calmly asked whether she preferred being thrown out onto the street. And Amelia answered that she preferred solving her own problems, that she had lived 27 years without being saved by anyone, and did not need to start now. And he studied her for a long moment, with unreadable gray eyes before slowly walking to his familiar corner table and sitting down, adjusting the cuff of his suit with practiced ease as if nothing had happened, telling her that Pemberton would no longer trouble her, and that he had bought the diner's lease that morning, that she owed Pemberton nothing anymore. And Amelia froze as if struck by lightning, staring at the man who spoke as though he were commenting on the weather rather than spending a sum that could easily reach hundreds of thousands of dollars, whispering what he had done as her voice caught, and Alexander replied that he had told her already, that he had bought the lease and that she would pay rent to him from now on at a reasonable rate with no deadlines. And Amelia shook her head fiercely, tears spilling despite her efforts to stop them as she said she would not accept charity, that she had told him before she did not need his money, his pity, or for him to turn her into another debt to be paid, and she stepped toward his table, her hands clenched into fists as years of anger, shame, and hurt threatened to explode, telling him in a breaking voice that she had once had a man control her life, giving her everything only to use it to bind her, beat her, and make her believe she was nothing without him, and that she would never let that happen again, not ever. And silence followed her declaration. Amelia breathing hard as she realized she had just spoken a secret she had never told anyone, wanting to run and hide and retreat into herself. Yet she remained standing, chin lifted, tears streaming down her cheeks, and Alexander looked at her, and this time there was something different in his icy gray eyes, not coldness or calculation but something close to pain. And he spoke slowly, his voice lower than before, saying this was not charity and not control, that he was not doing this for her but for Misha. And Amelia blinked, confused, as Alexander sighed, a heavy sigh carrying 1,000 untold stories, and said that his son had not laughed in 4 years since his mother died, that Misha was intelligent and obedient, and did everything asked of him, but did not laugh or feel joy or truly live as a child. And then he met her, and in a single afternoon, Alexander heard his son's laughter for the first time in 4 years, and Amelia felt her heart tighten, and Alexander continued that this diner was the only place Misha wanted to come, the only place he could be himself, and he could not allow it to disappear, that this was not charity but an investment, the most important investment of his life, an investment in his son's happiness. And Amelia stood there with tears still falling, though no longer from anger, looking at the man before her, the man Chicago feared, the man who could kill without blinking, and she saw a father doing everything he could to make up for what he could not give his child, a mother's love, and at last she said she would pay the rent in full at market rate with no discount, and that she would teach Misha to cook for free because she wanted to, not because he paid her. And Alexander looked at her, and for the first time she saw the corner of his mouth curve into a real smile, small and fleeting but real, and he said simply that it would be as she wished. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Harold, and Amelia's life was slowly settling into a new rhythm, with Misha coming every afternoon to learn how to cook, children's laughter filling the diner each day, and Alexander sitting in his familiar corner with a cup of black coffee, his gaze drifting to her from time to time in a way she could not explain, except for the warmth that spread through her chest whenever it happened. Yet the past never truly disappears. It only hides in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. And that afternoon, as Amelia was alone in the diner preparing ingredients for Misha's cooking lesson, the past kicked the door open and walked in, because Derek Lawson stood in the doorway, tall and gaunt with dirty blonde hair and the bloodshot eyes of a drunk. 3 years gone, and he looked far more worn down. Yet the vicious smile on his lips was unchanged, the same smile Amelia had seen in countless nightmares, greeting her as his beloved wife, in a drawn-out voice as he staggered inside and asked if she had missed him. And Amelia froze, the wooden spoon slipping from her hand and clattering onto the floor, her body reacting before her mind could catch up, shrinking in on itself as if trying to become invisible, asking him what he was doing there in a trembling whisper she struggled to control, while Derek laughed, his voice thick and cruel as he stepped closer with each word, saying he had heard she had big spenders for customers now, Russian Mafia types, sneering that she must be sleeping with them, and that it was no wonder the diner was still open, mocking her with the suggestion that she had always been good at that. And Amelia backed away until her spine hit the wall, insisting it was not what he thought, and that there was nothing between them, only for Derek to wave it off and say he did not care who she slept with, that he needed money, and she owed him. And Amelia shouted back without meaning to, anger flaring hot enough to drown her fear, as she told him he had taken all her money and disappeared, beaten her for 3 years, and asked what he thought she owed him, and the slap came so fast she could not dodge it, her head snapping to the side, her cheek burning as the metallic taste of blood spread in her mouth, and Derek roared that she dared talk back to him, grabbing her wrist and squeezing until she heard bone grind, snarling that she thought he was afraid of those Mafia men, and that he would kill her before they lifted a finger. And Amelia struggled, but her strength was nothing compared to his, tears spilling not from pain but from despair, from the familiar sensation of being powerless before violence. a feeling she had believed she escaped forever, until a voice cut through the room from the doorway, low and cold as ice, yet carrying a buried fury like a volcano on the verge of eruption, ordering him to let her go now. And Derek turned as Amelia saw Alexander standing there, with Misha behind him, the boy's gray eyes wide with horror. Yet it was Alexander who stole her breath, because she had seen him cold and seen him frightening, but never like this. His gray eyes no longer ice, but pure darkness. The darkness of hell itself, of death waiting patiently. His face expressionless, as if carved from frozen stone, his hand hanging at his side clenched into a fist so tight the knuckles were white, and Derek spat out a demand to know who he was. The bravado already thinning as Marcus stepped in behind Alexander and 2 more guards appeared at the back door, repeating the question with a visible tremor, while Alexander did not answer, slowly unbuttoning his suit cuff and rolling up his sleeve to reveal a powerful forearm covered in intricate tattoos whose meanings anyone familiar with the underworld would recognize, then advancing step by measured step like a tolling death bell, telling him again to release her, or he would break each of his fingers and shove them down his throat. And Derek dropped Amelia's wrist as if burned, stumbling back with a face drained of color, while Amelia swayed and nearly fell until a small hand clasped hers. And she looked down to see Misha there, gray eyes swimming with tears as he looked at her with worry and pain and whispered to ask if she was all right. And it was that question, those eyes, that finally broke Amelia, and she began to cry out loud. Derek vanished that very night, and Amelia did not ask what had happened to him, because she did not want to know and perhaps did not need to know. The only thing she knew was that the next morning Marcus came to the diner with an envelope containing divorce papers already signed. There was no explanation, just a finality that made Amelia dare to hope that Derek Lawson was gone for good. She did not ask how. She simply signed the documents with trembling hands, and a feeling as if the chains that had bound her for so many years had finally been removed, and the following 2 weeks passed like a dream Amelia barely dared believe was real. Because every afternoon Alexander and Misha came to the diner, and they no longer kept to themselves as before. Alexander began sitting at the counter instead of the hidden corner, close to where Amelia worked, and they talked while she cooked. Conversations that began with small things about the Chicago weather shifting seasons, about Misha's favorite dishes, about new recipes Amelia wanted to try. But gradually those conversations deepened, touching corners of their lives both had long kept hidden. And one late evening when Misha had fallen asleep on a chair after spending the entire afternoon baking, Alexander and Amelia sat across from each other with cups of cold coffee. The diner closed, the lights dim, rain whispering outside, and Irina, Alexander suddenly said, his voice lower than usual, "That was my wife's name, Misha's mother." And Amelia stayed silent, unwilling to break the rare moment of openness, and he continued that she had been the light of his life, that she knew who he was and what he did yet still loved him, telling him that within his darkness there were stars only she could see. And when Amelia gently asked what had happened to her, Alexander's eyes darkened, and his jaw tightened as he said she was killed because of him, because his enemies wanted to punish him. Unable to touch him, they took away what mattered most, and Misha witnessed everything when he was only 4 years old. And Amelia felt tears rise not for herself but for the man sitting before her, the man the world feared who carried a wound in his heart that would never heal, and she whispered that she was sorry and did not know what to say. And Alexander looked at her, and for once there was no ice in his gray eyes, but something softer and warmer, as he told her she had already done enough, that she had brought Misha back to him, the child he believed he had lost forever after that day, and that she had done what he could not do even with all the money and power in the world. And they sat in silence for a long time without needing words, sharing a quiet understanding between 2 souls beaten by life yet still standing, until Alexander slowly raised his hand, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently touched her cheek, his hand rough yet warm, and Amelia realized she was leaning into his palm as if it were where she belonged, and he told her in a voice low as breath that she made him want to believe in things he had long stopped believing in. And Amelia looked at him, into the gray eyes watching her as if she were the last miracle left in the world. And in that moment she knew she loved this man, knowing how dangerous it was, knowing his world was made of darkness and blood, yet loving him all the same, loving the gentle father and the broken man trying to piece himself back together, until Misha's sleepy voice drifted from the chair nearby, calling Papa and saying it was time to go home because he was too tired. And Alexander withdrew his hand, though his gaze lingered on Amelia for one more second, carrying with it the promise of something new just beginning. 3 days after that night, Misha begged Amelia to come over for dinner, insisting that he wanted to show her the cat named Whiskers that he had secretly been keeping in the garden, and Amelia tried to refuse, but the clear gray eyes lifted to her in pleading made it impossible for her to say no. And so on that Saturday afternoon, she found herself sitting in a black SUV with Marcus at the wheel, her heart pounding as the car left her familiar neighborhood and headed toward the northern suburbs of Chicago, where million-dollar mansions hid behind tall fences and reinforced iron gates. And when the vehicle stopped before a massive wrought iron gate adorned with intricate patterns, Amelia felt as though she were stepping into another world altogether, the gates opening slowly to reveal a stone-paved drive leading through an expansive garden, with perfectly trimmed trees, a marble fountain, and finally the mansion itself. And she had imagined it would be large, but she was not prepared for this. A 3-story building in French architectural style, with white stone columns, curved iron balconies, and dozens of tall windows reflecting the sunset like glittering jewels. Because this was not a house, it was a palace. And Amelia heard her name as Misha ran out through the grand doors with a radiant smile, announcing that she had come and that he would take her to see Whiskers right away, pulling her through the garden to show her every flower bed and every favorite hiding place, until they reached the calico cat curled inside a small wooden shelter beneath an ancient oak tree. And Amelia laughed, savoring Misha's innocence. Yet she could not ignore the guards positioned throughout the garden, the security cameras mounted at every corner, the invisible layers of protection surrounding the place like a fortress. And dinner was served in a vast dining room with an oak table large enough to seat 20 people, though only the 3 of them sat together at one end, close like a real family, the food prepared by a private chef. Yet Amelia noticed a plate of cookies she had taught Misha to bake, placed in a position of honor, as though it were the main course. And when she looked at Alexander in surprise, he explained that Misha had insisted on baking them himself for her, ruining the first 2 batches but refusing to give up, and the meal was warmer than any Amelia had experienced in years, with Misha talking about school, proudly sharing his test scores, asking endless questions about cooking and her grandmother's recipes. While Alexander listened, occasionally adding a comment, his gaze continually returning to Amelia with a warmth she was beginning to recognize. And after dinner, when Misha had finally gone to bed after countless requests for just 5 more minutes, Alexander led Amelia out onto the second-floor balcony, where she could see the entire garden below, the city of Chicago glittering in the distance, and a night sky scattered with stars. And he asked her what she saw, standing close enough for her to feel the heat of him beside her. And Amelia looked around at the luxury, at the guards still standing watch in the darkness, at the world she did not belong to, and answered honestly that she saw a golden prison. And Alexander turned to her, his face softened by moonlight, telling her in a low, aching voice that she should stay away from him, that he had pulled her into this world without asking her consent, that he was selfish and he knew it, but now he was telling her the truth, that he was darkness, that he was death and danger, that anyone who came close to him was hurt, that she had seen what happened to Irina, and that he could not endure it if the same thing happened to her. And Amelia looked at him, into gray eyes filled with real fear, the fear of loss, the fear of repeating tragedy, and she realized that he was not pushing her away because he did not want her, but because he wanted her so deeply that he was willing to let her go to keep her safe. And she asked what if she wanted to stay, her voice steadier than she expected. And Alexander stared at her as if she had said something impossible, telling her she did not understand, and Amelia stepped closer and said that she understood far more than he thought, that the real question was whether he was brave enough to allow someone to stay, or whether he would continue hiding alone in the darkness forever. Alexander did not answer right away, standing there in silence, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made Amelia feel as if she were being burned from the inside out. And then he turned away and walked down the steps leading into the garden, with Amelia following without needing an invitation, moving between rows of white roses in full bloom beneath the moonlight, their sweet fragrance drifting through the cool night air, until Alexander finally stopped beside the fountain, the sound of trickling water like a gentle melody, and he said in a low, rough voice that she knew who he was. She knew what he had done, how many people he had killed, how many lives he had destroyed, and yet she still stood there asking whether he had the courage, telling her she was insane, Amelia Bennett, and Amelia replied that perhaps she was, stepping closer until she could see every line of his face in the moonlight, but that she too had lived in darkness in her own way, that she knew what it was like and knew no one deserved to be there alone. And Alexander looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the cold mask crack completely, revealing beneath it a man who was exhausted and lonely, starving for love yet terrified to his core of losing it again. And he confessed in a voice barely above a breath that he could not stop thinking about her. From that rainy night onward, from the moment she fed his son and refused his money as if he had insulted her, that he had tried to push her from his mind but could not, that she was everywhere, in his dreams, in his thoughts, in every waking moment, and that he did not know what to do with it, did not know how to love someone without destroying them, and Amelia felt her heart melting as she lifted her hand to his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin and the roughness of stubble beneath her palm, and he closed his eyes at her touch as if it were something he had longed for his entire life, and she whispered that perhaps he did not need to know how, that perhaps they only needed to figure it out together. And when she finished speaking, Alexander opened his eyes, and in that instant the gray within them ignited, and he bent down, one hand lifting her chin, the other wrapping around her waist to pull her close, and then their lips met, the kiss beginning softly like a question, like a request for permission. But when Amelia responded, when she slid her arms around his neck and drew him closer, the kiss flared into something fierce and desperate, like two drowning souls clinging to each other in a storming sea, and he kissed her as if she were air and he were suffocating, as if she were light and he had been lost in darkness for far too long. And Amelia kissed him back with everything she had, with all the pain she had endured, all the loneliness she had carried, all the love she believed had died but was now roaring back to life stronger than ever. And when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, foreheads touching, standing in the rose garden beneath the moonlight, like figures torn from a fairy tale. Yet this was no fairy tale. Amelia knew that. This was the real world, with real bullets and real enemies and death that could arrive at any moment. She knew she was stepping into the most dangerous spiral of her life, but as she looked into the gray eyes watching her as if she were his entire universe, Amelia realized she no longer wanted to turn back. 1 week after the kiss in the garden, Amelia lived suspended between happiness and unease, because she and Alexander had not defined what they were to each other. Yet the lingering looks, the accidental brushes of hands, and the late-night conversations said everything. She was in love, and she knew he was too, even though neither of them spoke it aloud. But life never allows happiness to last too long without demanding a price, and that afternoon Amelia was alone in the diner, preparing to close early so she could go to the estate for dinner with Misha as promised. And she did not hear the bell or the footsteps, until the familiar voice behind her froze her blood, asking if she missed him, darling wife. And she turned to see Derek standing there, not the Derek from before, but a man like a cornered wild animal, eyes bloodshot and crazed, clothes filthy and rumpled, a handgun in his grip aimed straight at her. And Amelia went rigid, unable to breathe or move, staring into the dark mouth of the gun as if into death itself, while Derek ranted that he had told her not to get involved with the Russians, that they threatened him, drove him out of the city, banned him from returning. But he would show them. He would kill her, and then they would learn not to mess with Derek Lawson. And Amelia begged him to put the gun down, her voice shaking so badly she barely recognized it, telling him they could talk, only for him to laugh madly and say he had tried to talk and no one listened, so the gun would speak for him. And he pulled the trigger, but there was no shot, and in that instant the back door burst open, and Marcus stormed in like a force of nature, what followed happening too fast for Amelia to process, as Marcus dropped Derek with a single blow, the gun skidding away, 2 more guards appearing and hauling Derek upright, and then they began to beat him, and Amelia stood there watching as if trapped in a nightmare, hearing the thud of blows and the sounds of pain. Derek no longer a threat but a broken figure being crushed by men trained to kill, and nausea rose in her throat as she screamed for them to stop, warning they would kill him. But no one listened, because that was exactly what they intended, until Alexander's voice cut through from the front door, calm and cold, ordering it to end, and everything stopped at once. Alexander standing there in his immaculate black suit, gray eyes sweeping the room with terrifying composure as he ordered them to take him away and clean it up, and the guards dragged Derek out, and Amelia knew she would never see him again, and she stood trembling, staring at Alexander in horror as he approached and reached for her face, only for her to step back and whisper for him not to touch her, and he spoke her name softly, asking to explain, but she shouted through tears that she had just watched a man beaten to death on his orders, that he commanded an army, that this was normal to him, and he replied that Derek had tried to kill her and asked whether she thought he would stand by and watch, and she asked who he really was, who Alexander Volkov truly was, and after a heavy silence he sighed and told her he was exactly who she thought, a mafia boss who controlled half of Chicago's underworld, a man who had killed and would kill again anyone who threatened those he cared about, including her, and the world collapsed beneath Amelia's feet, because she had known it deep down, yet hearing it spoken was something else entirely, and she said she could not do this, that she could not live in this world. And then she ran out into the night, leaving behind a man standing there with gray eyes filled with pain. Amelia ran without looking where she was going, her bare feet slapping against the icy sidewalk because she had left her shoes somewhere in the diner, running until her lungs felt ready to burst, until her legs could no longer carry her, and she collapsed onto a stone bench in a deserted park, where she cried as she had never cried before, crying for herself, for the innocence she had lost, for a love that had barely begun only to be crushed beneath the heel of brutal reality, because she had known, from the very beginning she had known who Alexander was, yet she had deceived herself, closed her eyes to the signs, chosen to see the gentle father instead of the cold-blooded killer, and that night she slept in the park, curled up on the stone bench like a homeless woman. And the next morning she returned to the diner with swollen eyes and a shattered soul, her phone ringing endlessly with Alexander's number flashing again and again, but she did not answer, messages flooding her inbox with short lines begging for a chance to explain, all of which she deleted without reading. Marcus knocking on the diner door several times without her opening it, aware that guards were still watching over her, that she could feel their presence. Yet she did not care. And 1 week passed like a prolonged nightmare. The Magnolia Diner returning to its familiar emptiness, the mysterious patrons Alexander once sent no longer appearing, leaving only Ruth, who stopped by each morning for her coffee and a worried look, asking if she was all right, to which Amelia only nodded and turned away, unwilling to let anyone see the pain in her eyes, working like a machine, cooking without joy, cleaning without purpose, merely existing from one day to the next. And every night she lay in her shabby apartment staring at the cracked ceiling, remembering afternoons with Misha learning to bake in the kitchen, remembering his laughter, remembering those clear gray eyes looking at her with unconditional affection, remembering Alexander, the way he looked at her, the kiss beneath the moonlight, the warmth in his voice when he spoke of Irina and his grief, only to then remember the sound of bones breaking, the blood on the walls, the terrifying calm with which he ordered Derek taken away, and fear would coil tight around her once more, until on the 7th day, as she sat dazed behind the counter, the doorbell rang, not Alexander, not Marcus, but a courier holding a small envelope with no return address, and Amelia opened it with trembling hands, her heart tightening at what lay inside. A crayon drawing of 3 people standing before a small building with a sign reading, Magnolia Diner. A woman with auburn hair, a tall, dark-haired man, and a small boy between them holding both their hands, and beneath the drawing, in a child's uneven handwriting, the words saying that he missed Miss Amelia, that he was sorry Papa had made her sad, and begging her not to leave him. And Amelia stared at the drawing as tears spilled uncontrollably once more, clutching it to her chest, feeling each waxy stroke like a blade cutting into her heart, because Misha was not at fault. He was only an 8-year-old child missing a mother's love, a child who had found in her something he had longed for all his life, and what right did she have to abandon him for the sins of his father? Yet could she accept that world, a world of darkness and blood, a world where death lurked at every corner? She did not know. She truly did not know, and that tearing uncertainty was ripping her apart from the inside. Amelia was still clutching Misha's drawing when the diner bell rang again. She looked up, a sudden spike of fear piercing her numbness as she realized she had made a terrible mistake. Only hours earlier, in a fit of grief-stricken rage, she had screamed at the guards outside to leave her alone, threatening to call the police if they didn't stop watching her, and they had finally retreated to the perimeter of the block. She hoped it was Misha or Alexander returning, but what she saw made the blood in her veins turn to ice. 3 men stepping inside. Not the familiar bodyguards in black suits she had grown used to seeing. These men were different. Dressed in black leather jackets, gold chains glinting at their throats, tattoos on their wrists, unlike those of Alexander's men, radiating a different kind of danger, one without rules or limits. The leader, a middle-aged man with slicked-back silver hair, a sharp-featured face, and steel-blue eyes that swept the diner with contempt before settling on Amelia with a chilling interest, asking in heavily accented Russian if this was Volkov's girl, and saying he had thought Volkov's taste would be better than this. And Amelia forced herself to speak, asking who they were and what they wanted, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs, only for the silver-haired man to laugh, a harsh and hollow sound, introducing himself as Viktor Sorokin, as if the name alone should make her fall to her knees, saying he wanted to send a message to her lover, and before Amelia could react, one of the other men swept his arm across the counter, sending everything crashing to the floor, the shrill sound of shattering glass filling the air, followed by chairs being kicked over and a window smashed, destruction spreading from the kitchen to the counter, From the framed photographs on the walls to the Magnolia Diner sign her grandmother had hung 40 years earlier, and Amelia screamed, trying to stop them. But a brutal slap across her face knocked her to the floor, blood spilling from the corner of her mouth as her head spun. Yet she tried to crawl up again, begging them to stop, saying this was all she had. And Victor looked down at her without a trace of pity, telling her that was exactly why he was doing this, that Volkov thought he could touch Sorokin's empire without consequences and that he was wrong, and she would be the proof of that mistake. And he nodded to his men, who advanced on Amelia with predatory eyes as she backed away until her spine hit the wall, and there was nowhere left to run. One of them grabbing her hair and yanking her up as she screamed in pain, the other driving a fist into her stomach and then into her face. The world spinning as pain dulled her senses, and she fell to the floor, curling in on herself, trying to shield her head as kicks rained down, blood pouring from somewhere on her scalp, the metallic taste flooding her mouth as she realized that if this continued she would die right there in her grandmother's diner. And Victor's cold voice told her to remember to tell Volkov that Sorokin sent his regards as he turned toward the door, ordering them to leave her alive, because he wanted Volkov to see his handiwork. And when they were gone, Amelia lay amid the wreckage, gasping for breath, tears and blood mingling on her swollen face. Reaching weakly for her phone lost somewhere among the shards of glass, and when her fingers finally touched the cracked screen she did not think, she simply dialed the one name that filled her mind, whispering Alexander as the line rang, her voice breaking with sobs as she begged him to come, saying she needed him, not knowing what she called him or what else she said, only knowing that before she lost consciousness, she heard his deep voice through the phone, filled with panic and fear, calling her name over and over, telling her to stay on the line, telling her he was coming, telling her to hold on because he was coming. Amelia woke in an unfamiliar room, lying on a soft bed dressed in white silk sheets. Late afternoon sunlight filtering through heavy curtains as it took her a few seconds to remember what had happened, the diner destroyed, the beating, and then the call she had made to Alexander. And when she tried to sit up, a sharp pain tore through her body and drew a groan from her lips. "Do not move." The familiar deep voice came from the corner of the room, and she turned her head to see Alexander sitting in an armchair beside the bed, gray eyes darkened with exhaustion, his suit rumpled as if he had been there for hours. "How long have I been here?" Amelia asked hoarsely. 2 days, he replied. "The doctors say you have 2 broken ribs, a mild head injury, and countless bruises. You are very lucky to be alive." Amelia closed her eyes as images of that night surged back like a nightmare. "Victor Sorokin," she whispered, and Alexander's eyes darkened at the name, his jaw tightening until she could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin. "He will pay," he said, his voice icy but seething with rage beneath the surface. "I swear to you, he will pay for every wound on your body." "Who is Victor?" Amelia asked. "You owe me an explanation, the whole truth, no more secrets." Alexander was silent for a long moment before standing and walking to the window. "Victor Sorokin is a Mafia boss from New York," he began, his voice low and heavy. "He and I have been enemies for many years, over territory, power, everything. But he could never defeat me directly, so he targeted the people I love. Irina," Amelia whispered, and she saw Alexander's shoulders stiffen as he turned back toward her, pain filling his gray eyes beyond anything words could hold. "He ordered her killed," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Right in front of Misha. My son watched his mother get shot and I could do nothing to stop it. I swore revenge, but Victor was too powerful, too well protected, so I waited, building my strength in silence, waiting for the right moment. But now he has touched you. He has broken the unspoken rules. And I will not wait any longer." Amelia looked at the man standing before her, the man Chicago feared, the man who could order death without blinking, and she saw a husband who had lost his wife, a father trying to protect his child, a broken man struggling to piece himself back together. "I am staying," she said, her voice steadier than she expected, and Alexander stared at her as if he had misheard. "You do not understand," he said. "Being with me means living in danger every day. It means you could die at any time. I understand," Amelia replied. "And I still choose to stay. I choose you. I choose Misha. I choose this family no matter how mad or dangerous it is. Because for the first time in my life I feel like I belong somewhere." Alexander moved to the bed and sat beside her, lifting a hand to gently stroke her hair with a tenderness she never imagined those killing hands could hold. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. And instead of answering, Amelia pulled him down and kissed him. A kiss, tasting of tears and desperation, yet filled with a promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. That night they were together for the first time, not in wild passion but in warmth and comfort, two shattered souls finding healing in each other's arms, and Amelia fell asleep against Alexander's chest, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. But peace did not last. In the middle of the night, Alexander's phone rang, shattering the silence. Amelia woke as he jolted upright and saw his face change in the dim glow of the screen. "When?" he asked in Russian, his voice icy but threaded with rising fear. "Find him. Find him at all costs." He ended the call and turned to Amelia, his gray eyes no longer ice but hellfire. "Misha," he said, his voice breaking. "Our security system was hacked from the inside. The traitor has already been executed, but it is too late. The perimeter alarms were disabled without a sound. Victor's men slipped in and took Misha right from his bed. The line of black vehicles tore through the Chicago night like heralds of death, and Amelia sat beside Alexander in the car, feeling the fury radiating from the man next to her like the heat of an impending volcanic eruption, because he did not speak a single word the entire drive, his gray eyes fixed straight ahead with lethal focus, yet his hand gripped hers, as if she were the only anchor keeping him from plunging into madness. And Victor had called demanding a meeting at an abandoned warehouse in the southern Port District, a place Marcus said was neutral ground between the two factions, insisting Alexander come alone, though Amelia knew that would never happen, not because Alexander feared death, but because he feared dying before saving his son. And when the convoy stopped before the massive warehouse with its stained concrete walls and rusted metal roof, Alexander told her to stay in the car and promise him she would not move no matter what happened. And Amelia nodded even though they both knew it was a lie. And Alexander looked at her one last time, gray eyes holding every word of love he never said aloud, before stepping into the darkness with Marcus and the guards. And Amelia waited exactly 3 minutes, before quietly opening the door and slipping inside through a side entrance she had noticed when the car arrived. And inside the warehouse stretched a vast space of towering steel columns and dim industrial lights, where Victor Sorokin stood at the center with a triumphant smile, Misha beside him with his hands bound and a gun pressed to his head by one of Victor's men. And Amelia's heart shattered at the sight of Misha's gray eyes, dry and silent, filled not with tears but with the astonishing courage of a child who had seen too much darkness. And Victor drawled Alexander's name, taunting that he had finally come and sneering that he thought Alexander would abandon the boy just as he had lost his wife. And Alexander stood 10 steps away, shoulders squared and head held high, radiating absolute authority, even at a disadvantage, asking what Victor wanted in a voice cold as steel. And Victor answered that he wanted Chicago, all of it, Alexander's territory, his roots, everything, in exchange for the boy's life, until Misha's small but steady voice cut through the air, warning Victor that he was making a mistake, that he had hurt Miss Amelia and Papa would never forgive him, because Papa never lets anyone hurt his family. And Victor laughed until the sound died when he met Alexander's gaze, because the gray eyes were no longer ice or storm but pure death staring back at him. And Alexander said evenly that Victor had touched his son and hurt the woman he loved, and asked whether he truly thought there would be negotiations. And in that instant, Amelia acted. She knew she had no strength to fight, and even a deep breath made her broken ribs feel like they were being stabbed with knives. But she saw a heavy industrial trolley loaded with scrap metal standing just a few feet away from a stack of rusted pipes balanced precariously against a column. She knew she couldn't fight, and lifting anything was impossible with her broken ribs, but she could push. She just needed momentum. Gritting her teeth against the white-hot agony exploding in her chest with every shallow breath, Amelia grabbed the handle of the trolley. Instead of using her muscles, she threw her entire body weight forward, shoving the heavy cart with a desperate lunge. The trolley rolled and slammed hard into the base of the scaffolding. The impact was enough. The pipes crashed onto the concrete floor with a deafening, thunderous clang that echoed through the silent warehouse. The gunman flinched, instinctively turning his head toward the noise for a split second, a fatal mistake. Before he could look back, a single gunshot cracked like thunder from Alexander's position, dropping the man instantly as chaos erupted all at once, because Marcus and the guards who had been lying in wait opened fire from their positions, gunshots cracking like thunder as Amelia rushed to Misha, wrapping her body around him and pulling him down behind a wooden crate, whispering again and again that everything would be all right, that Papa was coming, that she would never let anyone hurt him again. And the firefight felt endless, though it lasted only minutes, until the final shots fell silent, and Amelia lifted her head to see Alexander standing over Victor Sorokin's lifeless body, smoke curling from the gun in his hand, and he did not look down at his fallen enemy but toward her and Misha, gray eyes blazing with something even stronger than relief. calling his son's name with a voice thick with emotion, and Misha broke down for the first time since the abduction, running into Alexander's arms in sobs, and Amelia rose unsteadily and walked toward the two men in her life, as Alexander reached out and drew her into the embrace, and the three of them stood together amid the ruined warehouse and the lingering scent of gunpowder, holding one another as if they would never let go, and Alexander whispered into her hair that it was over and that they were going home. Amelia stood in the new Magnolia Diner and looked around with a heart overflowing with gratitude. The diner rebuilt in a better location, in a safer neighborhood, with a modern kitchen that Alexander had insisted on designing himself, yet every detail still carried the soul of Grandma Maggie. The Magnolia Diner sign restored from fragments of the old one, the secret recipes still cooked every day, and her grandmother's photograph hanging in the place of greatest honor, where the late afternoon sun always fell like a blessing from heaven. And Alexander had kept his promise to legalize most of his business, the shipping company, the restaurant chain, the real estate investments, all clean and transparent. And Amelia knew he would never be entirely ordinary, but he was building a future Misha could be proud of, a legacy without blood that his son could inherit, and their wedding had taken place in the spring, small and intimate, with only the closest people present. Amelia wearing the simple white dress her grandmother had worn more than 50 years earlier, and as she walked down the aisle with Misha holding her hand to lead her to his father, she knew her grandmother was smiling at her from somewhere beyond, and Alexander stood waiting in his familiar black suit, but his gray eyes were no longer icy. They shone with love and happiness as he watched her approach. And now, 1 year later, Amelia rested a hand on her gently rounding belly where a small life was growing. The child of her love with Alexander, the little brother or sister Misha eagerly awaited each day, and she looked out the diner window, where an afternoon rain was beginning to fall over Chicago, and memories of the stormy night 1 year earlier came rushing back. The night an 8-year-old boy, soaked by rain, walked into her diner and changed her life forever. "Mama," Misha's voice called from the kitchen. "I finished the cookies." "Mama, do you want to taste them?" And Amelia turned, tears spilling at the sound of that word, because Misha had begun calling her Mama 3 months earlier, on the anniversary of Irina's death, when the boy placed flowers on his birth mother's grave and said that Mama should not worry anymore because he had a new mother now, and she loved him very much. And Amelia stepped into the kitchen where Misha stood with an apron dusted in flour and a radiant smile, now 9 years old, taller and more grown, yet with the same clear gray eyes as the first day. And she tasted the cookie and nodded in praise, sending Misha jumping with joy as he ran out to show his father at their familiar table. And Alexander lifted the boy into his lap, kissed his hair, then turned his gaze to Amelia with a look she would never tire of seeing. And she joined them as Alexander pulled her close, one arm around his son and one around his wife as if afraid they might disappear if he let go. And outside, the rain fell heavier as Misha suggested they run out and dance in it like he had seen in a movie, and Alexander looked to Amelia for approval and she only smiled and nodded, and the three of them stepped out into the rain, hand in hand. Misha laughing among the falling drops, Alexander watching his family with eyes that 1 year earlier Amelia could never have imagined on that cold man, and Amelia stood there, soaked by rain, yet happier than she had ever been. Because she had begun with a failing diner and a broken heart. She had met a lonely child and fed him with everything she had. She had loved a dangerous man and chosen to stay knowing the cost. And now she had a family. Imperfect and not normal by the world's definition, but hers, completely hers. And this story reminds us that love can come from the most unexpected places. That family is not only blood, but those who choose to stand together through storms. That sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change an entire life. And most importantly, that we deserve to be loved, no matter how painful the past or how difficult the present may be. And if this story has touched your heart, please press the like button, share it with the people you love, and subscribe to our channel so you do not miss more moving stories each day. Tell us how this story made you feel, and whether you have ever believed that love can overcome every barrier by sharing your thoughts. In the comments below, we would truly love to hear what is in your heart, and we wish all of you watching this video good health, joyful lives, and days filled with love. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.